Hey dudes, good morning. How are y'all doing? Happy Friday, happy Tech at State number 7. We're going to start off with a quick video.
Hey, thanks for coming to Tech at State. We invite you to join the conversation by tweeting questions, comments, and insights. Be sure to use the hashtag TechAtState, and your tweet will be shown on the live My Stanley Tour displays throughout the Tech at State conference. Feel free to stop by the My Stanley setup to learn more about live Twitter displays powered by MetroStar Systems. Start tweeting now.
Aren't we getting so fancy? That was really, really fancy. I almost don't need to be here anymore. It's kind of awesome. You guys, thank you so much for coming today. We are really excited for the day we've got planned. We're grateful for you guys to all help us fill this fantastic auditorium at GW, and we're looking forward to the conversations with the speakers later. So she's already told you about the hashtag. We really do want you guys, as per the usual, to be communicating with outside communities who are plugged in. We've got an online audience throughout the day. We'll be live streaming, so keep the comments coming for sure. I want to thank our partners to kick us off, and let me just list them from the top. Of course, number one, our fantastic hosts here, George Washington, particularly the law school, for helping make this happen. We're all excited, I was saying on the margins, to get out of the State Department where connectivity is a more sure thing. Also, we're really grateful for the support from SAIC, from MicroStrategy, and from MetroStar Systems. All of these guys have demo tables out in the hallway, so we really encourage you throughout the day to go check them out and talk with them and learn more about what they're doing. We're going to be pretty crowded today. We're pumped about that, but please, work with us, as there may be just, standing room only available at certain times. And let me, without further ado, introduce our first speaker, the rock star dean of the George Washington Law School, Paul Schiff Berman, who, let's go real interesting on this. Is he on Twitter? Guesses. Yes. You're wrong. He's not. Does he have a dean's blog? Yes. You're right. And one of the really relevant things for this audience as well, he was one of the first to structure a course around cyber law. And so I think there's no better person than Paul to kick us off. Thank you so much, Paul.
Yes, so back in '98 when I became a law professor, professors were just starting to look at cyber law issues, and so I wrote one of the first case books trying to define what the field is, but of course that has meant that I've had to do 5 editions in 10 years since then. Actually now we're on, I think, edition 6. Anyway, so it's not such an easy thing to have a cyber law case book. Anyway, I am really pleased to be able to partner with the State Department on this sort of an event. And you might think, well, where's the law here? Why should the law school be involved in something like this? Well, I think, first of all, that legal education is much broader than just being about training lawyers. So, for example, we are one of the leading, probably the leading patent law law schools in the entire country. And so we now have a program in patent law that is not for lawyers. It's for engineers, it's for corporate executives, it's for government officials to not do a 3-year JD degree, but do a shorter 1-year degree that would help advance their professional goals, even not being lawyers. Similarly, we're working in the government contract space. We're the leading government contract law school in the country as well. And so with the business school, we're launching an executive degree that would focus on the law and business of government contracting. Also, similarly, we're doing an innovation program and an entrepreneurship program that we're launching hopefully in the fall, where we'll have law students and business students working with startup companies and entrepreneurs on the full range of their startup issues, their business planning and their marketing planning and their articles of incorporation and their patent portfolio and their licensing agreements and things like that, to put them into a position where they can then either go public or be bought by someone or get VC money or whatever it might be. So on a range of issues, it seems to me that the idea of a law school should be broader than just training lawyers for practice. Likewise, I think that it is important for a law school like GW in particular to connect with the policy community, the journalist community, the online community, and so forth, because GW is actually a very distinctive type of law school. People tend to think law schools are all alike. And I think law schools have actually done a very poor job of differentiating themselves over the years. But this law school is actually quite distinctive in focusing on what I call law in action, law out in the real world, not just in sort of ivory tower academia or in classrooms. We take advantage of our DC location to connect in all ways possible to the real world of law and policy practice. That includes getting our students out in the world. We give more credit for externships than pretty much any law school I know of. We have 250 courses per year, which I think is more than any law school in the country, many taught by leading practitioners and judges and government officials. We have huge numbers of connections to the public policy arena. Just in the month between November 15th and December 15th, we had 8 different faculty members testify on Capitol Hill, just as an example, and students worked on that. And we had students, we have students working on reforming the competition policy of the government of Peru, and things like that. So the amount of engagement in the real world of law and policy practice is actually quite distinctive and unlike many other law schools. And as part of that, we want to connect and provide a forum and a place for discussion about important social issues, whatever they might be. So we're launching a health law and policy program because obviously health is a big issue. We're launching an energy law and policy program. That's a big issue in this country. And there are no law schools that are really occupying the space of convening thought leaders, having discussion, as I like to say, in Washington, but outside the glare of Washington. So not in a Senate committee room, but in an academic environment where maybe we can forge consensuses, maybe we can forge principles that maybe won't be embodied in legislation tomorrow, but they might become the conventional wisdom of 5 years from now. Not in a partisan think tank, but in a nonpartisan academic environment where I think we can bring multiple stakeholders from multiple perspectives together on a wide variety of topics. So that's what I want this law school to be, one that is out there, engaged in the community, focused on law and action, connecting both our students and our faculty to a wide variety of people, not just lawyers, on a range of topics that are important to the world. So from that perspective, this is the ideal event for me to be helping to sponsor and introduce and provide a space for. I am also given the task of introducing Janice Jacobs, and I'm thrilled to do that. You have her bio in your brochure, but she is the Assistant Secretary for Consular Affairs, and prior to that, served as the Principal Secretary for the Bureau of Consular Affairs, and before that as U.S. Ambassador to both Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. And I think it's, we were talking just a couple of minutes ago before we started, to have someone who's doing this stuff on a day-to-day basis to talk about how information management, how processing information, how thinking about the uses of technology to address the sort of fire hose of material that comes in on a day-to-day basis in the sort of work that she does to make it clear that that's actually something that they're really grappling with on a day-to-day basis. This is real stuff. This is not just an academic exercise. It's not just sort of tech people over here and the people who are really doing the State Department work or public policy work or work abroad, relief work, et cetera, that they're over here and that the tech people are over here having a little discussion among themselves that is irrelevant to that world. It's not irrelevant, and I think Janice is going to tell us why it's not irrelevant and why the sorts of topics we're talking about today are essential to real practice in the real world. So I'm very excited to have her here. I'm excited to have all of you here. And please think of the law school, even if you're not lawyers, think of the law school as a place where you can consider having connections, doing events, having stakeholder meetings and conferences, involving law students in projects that you might have in mind. Let me know, because we're open to any kind of connection that will put law in action in the real world of policy practice, law practice, technology practice, government practice, diplomatic practice. I welcome you. Thank you, Janice.
Everyone. It's really nice to see such a good turnout for this event, and it's really exciting for me to be able to come here and talk about some of the work that we're doing in consular affairs, to give you some concrete examples of how we are using social media and how in a way it is transforming the way that we do our business, the way that we help American citizens overseas. I really appreciate talking about this subject with such a diverse group. I understand that we have government and academia, international organizations, and private sector reps here today, so that's really great. I believe strongly that through the skillful use of technology that we can make our organizations more effective. We work smarter by pooling talents and ideas together to share new and innovative ways of communicating. With whom, when, and how we communicate is absolutely critical to our work at the State Department. The instruments available to those of us engaged in the business of diplomacy and development have changed how we do business, and we must adapt and adjust to the multitude of these constantly appearing new tools. As Secretary Clinton has said, we are seeing cyberspace transform before our very eyes. We in the Bureau of Consular Affairs understand that the quality of service that we deliver to the public is affected by the manner in which we communicate. What we do matters. We create a more secure, democratic, and prosperous world. What we do is highly visible. We work hard to keep American citizens safe, well-informed, and documented. We advocate for children, our most vulnerable citizens, and through visas, we bring the world together by facilitating legitimate travel. We use real-time awareness to help fulfill the State Department's #1 priority, promoting the safety and security of American citizens overseas. As the leader of the Bureau tasked with that mission, I take seriously our commitment to using the best tools at our disposal. Now, I don't want to date myself too much, but we have come a long way in the State Department with regard to how we use technology to communicate. It used to be that our idea of rapid communication was a telegram or a fax. I joined the department when there was no email, no texting, no DVCs, and certainly no Skype. International phone calls were expensive and not very common. I remember dialing a phone and hammering out a memo on an IBM Selectric typewriter. So how dated is that? Though the concept of the internet had been around for decades, it really wasn't until the early 1990s that government agencies started going online with websites to communicate with the public. Since 2004, social media has taken off. Today we use Facebook, Twitter, blogs, and YouTube in ways that we could not even have imagined just 10 years ago. A look at the State Department's recent activities shows how we leverage digital networks to conduct foreign diplomacy. In January, our spokesperson took public questions from around the world via Twitter feed in 10 different languages and answered them during the daily press briefing, which provided a level of accessibility unimaginable even 5 years ago. Our U.S. mission to international organizations in Vienna recently hosted a virtual town hall meeting about nuclear proliferation, security, and safety, engaging the public on the United States' dialogue with the UN. The U.S. Embassy in Kuala Lumpur celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps in Malaysia through a special Facebook exhibit. Social media has been instrumental in establishing instant and direct communication between the State Department and the public. We live in an era when the information flow is a 24/7 reality. If we do not engage, we miss out. We in the Bureau of Consular Affairs are in the people business. We often have to be able to quickly, efficiently, and effectively reach our American citizens traveling or living abroad to warn them or to help them. We're constantly searching for new ways to exploit social media as a communication tool. We try to be a government leader in finding innovative ways to capitalize on it. Our preeminent website, travel.state.gov, boasted more than 50 million visits in 2011. We also have websites that target very specific American audiences. For example, the student considering a study abroad program or the parent considering an international adoption. Our free Smart Traveler iPhone app has been downloaded by 86,000 users since it was launched last summer. I'm sure that there are lots of iPhone users here today. The next time you are on iTunes, I encourage you to add this to your phone, especially if you are planning to travel abroad soon. And by the way, this app will soon be available for Android users as well. Our Twitter account has more than 200,000 followers, including the White House, and we are considered informative and relevant and almost as popular as Lady Gaga. But that's just what happens in the Bureau of Consular Affairs. At our embassies and consulates overseas, social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have become the standard default for communicating messages to the public. By public, we mean both American citizens living abroad as well as the local population, who are often very interested in our policies or visa procedures. For example, many of our embassies are even producing their own videos for YouTube to educate their publics on everything from the visa application process to internet scams. So what does all this mean? We believe that a well-informed traveler is a safer traveler. Social media has had a profound impact on how we keep our citizens updated on security and safety alerts in a particular country. Years ago, when we wanted to send an emergency message to our citizens, which we used to call warden messages, we used designated wardens, American citizens living among the local population, who were responsible for passing it along via fax, phone tree, or literally knocking on doors in their communities. Though it was the best system we had at the time, we weren't always getting widespread dissemination of our messages. And in a natural disaster, we often wouldn't even have use of telecommunications. A recent incident illustrates how social media helped us keep Americans informed and, as a result, safer. On December 22nd, our U.S. Consulate General in Matamoros, Mexico, issued an emergency message regarding violent bus attacks in the state of Veracruz, Mexico. As only a few hundred Americans were signed up to receive email notifications, the Post decided to publish 2 tweets on the warning, one in English and one in Spanish. That was at 5:30 p.m. By 6:45 p.m., CNN had posted an article about the message on its website, and by 7:05 p.m., the link had been tweeted to almost 6 million followers. Now that is getting our message out. When disaster strikes, social media can be used to maximize our efforts to assist Americans. Last month, an Italian cruise liner crashed and sank off the coast of Italy. we had more than 100 Americans on board. Within hours, consular officers from our embassy and consulates in Italy mobilized and were quickly accounting for Americans and providing traditional assistance such as arranging transportation, replacing passports, getting warm clothes, and even providing diapers to families with small children. In the aftermath, there was confusion and misinformation, but our embassy in Rome was tweeting official information in real time. By the second day, they posted a dedicated hotline number for people with any concerns. When all but 2 citizens were accounted for, the embassy mobilized its Twitter and Facebook communities to aid the search for the missing couple. Social media don't facilitate just one-way communication, as we know, but rather in several directions at once. We often find out about Americans in trouble through Facebook or Twitter. One American survivor from the cruise liner wreck borrowed someone's iPhone to update her Facebook status to "scared but okay," which alerted her family and eventually the embassy. This real-time awareness is invaluable as we push to account for those in danger. We've witnessed cases where American journalists have been detained abroad, and their last communication before detention was via Twitter, which can alert the closest embassy so we can arrange a visit to ensure their well-being. These days, we are not limited to just 1 or 2 ways of communicating a crisis. If one tool doesn't work, there are others available. Often, following a natural disaster or civil unrest, we may be unable to send text messages, but not have phone connection. The internet may work when cell phones don't. Or when the internet gets blocked, as it did a year ago in Egypt during the uprising, we can use the old-fashioned dial-up modems and fax machines to communicate with the world. When the department arranged to have U.S. citizens transported out of Egypt, we also relied on many individuals back in the United States to pass along messages to their loved ones directly because the internet in Egypt was severely paralyzed. I'm proud of how we've explored new ways to harness the benefits of social media. When something big happens, for example, the earthquake 2 years ago in Haiti, or the mass evacuations in Libya and Egypt last year, the department goes into crisis management mode. The Bureau of Consular Affairs establishes a task force specifically to manage the flood of inquiries from worried family members and friends. We log the inquiry so that we can better track the status of a citizen and keep families updated. The Bureau recently created a program on our travel.state.gov website that allows concerned friends and families to enter information directly into the database and even upload a photo of their loved one. Our officers on the ground can use the information as they account for people. It's real-time and it's effective. I don't know what new innovation will come along next to revolutionize the way that we connect, but I'm fairly certain that the State Department and the Bureau of Consular Affairs will be willing to give it a go. The real-time awareness that social media provides is a valuable tool and creates a new dynamic to engage both American and foreign audiences. We have an obligation to continue exploring new technologies to improve our communications and thus our service to American citizens. In closing, I want to say that my Bureau developed a list of 10 consular leadership tenets that reflect our core values. As I contemplate our successes with social media, I'm reminded of tenet number 9, learn constantly. We have to be willing to display humility by acknowledging our shortcomings and by continually working to improve our skills and knowledge. Or, in the words of Apple founder, the late Steve Jobs, we need to be willing to stay foolish. Thank you.
Ambassador Jacobs, thank you so much. I think that was a tremendous way to sort of kick off our day. For me as an employee of the State Department, it's a lot of fun over the last few years to see how truly we are looking at social media and various technologies to figure out how we can better serve the American publics that are most on our radar screen. And in the case, obviously, of Ambassador Jacobs' world, these are Americans who live abroad. If you guys want to see one way that Ambassador Jacobs' bureau is reaching out to these Americans, check out @TravelGov on Twitter, just to get a feel of how we're trying to communicate across the channels where people actually live. So let me introduce our next speaker. Craig Fugate is the administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He was appointed by President Obama in May 2009. Administrator Fugate was, prior to joining FEMA, the director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management. He began his emergency management career as a volunteer firefighter, emergency paramedic, and finally as a lieutenant with the Alachua, I probably said that wrong, County Fire Rescue. Mr. Fugate managed the largest federal disaster response in Florida history in 2004 as 4 major hurricanes affected the state in quick succession. Clearly, we are really pleased to have him here as somebody with so much experience in this space, and thank you for being here.
Good, it works. My personal theory is the reason why these are so popular is because so many of us don't smoke and we got to do something with our hands. Do you ever notice that? You know, it used to be when there was silence in the room, and the really old ones here, you remember, you just light up a cigarette and that could kind of fill that dead space. Today we get our phones out, right? It's like we don't know what to do with ourselves, so oh, I got to check my email. Like the world will end if I don't get it, and sometimes mine actually do. I'm not kidding. Early in my career here at FEMA, I was with Secretary Napolitano, and we were giving a speech at a conference. Actually, it was at the Red Cross. It was National Preparedness. And the Secretary was speaking, and my phone kept going off. But my staff were pretty calm, so I'm figuring, oh, it's the usual, you know, you send out a meeting message and you get the 3,000 cancellations that come back, you know. Except it kept going off. And I'm sitting behind her. This is on C-SPAN, so it's going to look really bad if I start reading my BlackBerry, because I'm still kind of new here to the Federal Service. And it kept going off, and she gets to the point where she starts doing Q&A, and I get my phone out, and I actually look at it, and it starts out, there's been a massive earthquake in America, Samoa. Scroll up a little bit. There's been a massive earthquake in America, Samoa, and a tsunami. Scroll up a little bit. There is heavy devastation and loss of life in America, Samoa. I get up, and the Secretary's still on TV answering questions. I'm going, ma'am, I have to go. Using technology to solve the world's problems is always fun because usually we don't know what the solution is, but we'll apply technology. And it's like, if you have enough technology, you can solve any problem. My experience is it just makes the bad stuff happen faster because if you don't know what outcome you're trying to change, technology is not magic. I remind people when we talk about cyber threats that they're going to take down the internet. Look, I was around when we were happy to have fax machines. And I remind people, we actually used to do things like conduct national elections and census with telegraph. And people go, this cyber threat can destroy our way of life. We might start reading books that don't have electric screens. Gee. So when I look at technology and everybody says, we want you to come speak at a technology conference, and a lot of people think because I tend to use a lot of technology that I'm like one of these big advocates about technology. I'm not. It's just a tool to me. Quite honestly, I could care less. 6 years ago, what was Twitter? Who ever heard of microblogging? And who would have ever thought emergency managers would have their own dedicated hashtag for trying to figure out how to use social media? And in those of you who don't know, its hashtag is social media, SMEM. If you want to get an idea of how my practitioner is trying to figure out, what do you do with social media? What does it do for us? And so let's take a step back. I'm in the business of trying to change outcomes. All right? Disasters happen. I can't stop them. If I could, they wouldn't happen, right? So I'm dealing with an environment where something has happened. Now, if we do absolutely nothing, it's going to follow a fairly predictable course. And if I do absolutely nothing, it's probably going to get better. Because what you'll find in disasters is people aren't waiting for you to come save them. Nobody's waiting for the U.S. to swoop in and save some country that got whacked in some disaster. Even in Haiti, as much as it was the impression here in the U.S. that we got to go save the Haitians were doing a pretty good job of saving themselves. In fact, in many cases, we got in their way. So the first assumption is, just because something bad has happened, it will follow a national progression to a point where it will stabilize, whether you do anything or not. So really what you're talking about here is, what part of that outcome are you going to change? Will fewer people die? That's a good measure. Another good measure is, how quickly can we make sure that certain types of functions can be established so that we can get other things going to change the outcome? Is it going to be safe and secure? Can we get to the injured? Can we get to the trapped? Can we recover the dead? Can we get just enough critical infrastructure to keep people alive long enough so they can start the next steps of survival, ultimately heading to recovery? And this oftentimes gets into the issues of standards and care, which in my profession is fun, because in dealing in the international world, when you start talking about humanitarian versus crisis response, it's great because you get the responders. We're totally focused on the individual. And in the humanitarian organizations, they're saying, you got to look at a more system approach, more sustainable, and all these other issues. And so my observation is, the responders are trying to save the trees, the humanitarian organizations are trying to save the forest. And it's always this interesting dynamic. So when I look at that outcome, it's oftentimes going to be, from your point of view, what your part of this puzzle is, what your role is, and trying to get to, what is that outcome you want to reach? What does success look like? How do you know you've successfully responded to a disaster? How do you know you've successfully recovered from a disaster? If you don't know those things, and you start applying technology, you'll speed up a lot of stuff. You may get a lot of information, but did it change the outcome? So let's talk about social media in its current state. There's a lot of discussion about how and what is appropriate for the federal government, for state and local governments, from other organizations, to look at individuals who are publishing information. Now, I say publishing because they put it out in the open with no express desire for it not to be read by anybody, right? So they're publishing information. They didn't, lock their tweets down. They're posting this in an open format that anybody can read. They're putting it on a blog that anybody can read. They're uploading to YouTube that anybody can see. So they're publishing. And the question is, if people are doing that, can we look at that information and get a better outcome? Well, then that poses the question, what information do you need to do a better job of changing the outcome? I mean, is it possible, and just here domestically in the States, when you look at last year, is it really possible to look at all of those posts, all of that information being published by individuals collectively, to figure out what's going on? So Joplin gets hit with a tornado. What information came up that was going to change anything we would do in that response? And it did, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but I think it's important. Always come back to the first question. What outcome are you trying to achieve? And then what data points are going to help you make the best decisions to get there? Because we're only talking information here. Nothing's actually moved. No tweet stops bleeding, right? This is the other thing I always think is people get into stuff like, this is magic. If we tweet something, it's all better. No, it's just information. Unless something has actually changed, that's just information. So what pieces of data are going to actually help us make a better decision? Well, now you got to understand how we have approached disasters in the United States. Our approach is all disasters are local, which tends to be one of those bumper sticker things we profess, but nobody really gets and goes, what do you mean, you're on your own? What it means is when a disaster happens, the impacts locally are going to dictate whether or not additional resources will be needed at next levels. And so we run our disaster model based upon how we divide up government in the United States. It starts with the local jurisdictions, the local political subdivisions. Generally have the primary responsibility for the day-to-day emergencies, right? You dial 911 or whatever your emergency number is, your response is generally a local response coming from a local jurisdiction. And most emergencies are handled at that level, but some will require additional assistance. And depending upon which state you're in, it varies, but generally if it gets bad enough, it's going to get to the state level. And then at that point, the state may engage, declare an emergency, call out state resources, including the National Guard, other state agencies, mutual aid from surrounding states to manage that. And if it exceeds those capabilities, it may go to the federal government and come from a request from the governor to the president for a disaster declaration. There, if the president concurs, would provide additional resources. Now, I would say if you looked at last year and you go, FEMA declared a lot of disasters, you probably thought we were pretty busy doing response. And you'd be wrong. Because most of those disasters were actually managed with those local and state resources. What our primary role was in activities that we call recovery, which some of you may say, well, still looks like response to us, but it wasn't the traditional lights and sirens. It was more of the mass care, the housing, and primarily financial assistance that goes back to local governments and individuals who had uninsured losses. So I'm in Washington. I have 10 FEMA regional offices that cover the country. We have the 50 states and territories. We have sovereign tribes, over 500. We have, I think it's over 2,000, almost 3,000 counties and who knows how many municipalities. And when disaster strikes, that system is local to the state to the federal government. And we've always looked at this, it has to demonstrate it's overwhelmed your capacity to meet certain requirements for that federal disaster declaration. So we were really focused on getting good assessments. And it seems like after these big disasters, we tend to learn lessons that aren't always good lessons. Have you ever had this where you do the after actions and you think you discovered something and you run with it and it turns out it wasn't the right answer? So, what do you think? Well, I want to ask you because we'll get some Q&A here in a minute. After Hurricane Katrina, one of the assumptions was the reason we got so far behind in the response, we didn't know how bad it was. All right? There were things happening we didn't know. We didn't know we had a massive levee failure and that we had massive flooding occurring. Anybody here remember watching the news when the journalists who stayed in New Orleans, who shouldn't have been in New Orleans, got out? The first things they said, which if you ever hear somebody say this after a hurricane makes landfall, run. It looks like we dodged the bullet. Remember that? Because they're downtown, and there were some windows blown out, and there were some trees down, but it didn't look like devastation. Of course, they weren't down in the 9th Ward. They didn't know how bad the flooding was because it hadn't gotten to them yet. So the assumption was we need to get teams in there to assess. All right, great. How do they get information back? We're going to have to get them satellite capabilities. And oh, by the way, we want to have video of that so we can see what's happening. And so a lot of work went into getting these teams and being able to insert them into these disaster areas. Well, with hurricanes, we know they're happening. We actually have satellites. They don't sneak up on us. So you actually have some time to gear up. You don't get that with an earthquake, as we saw in Haiti. It just happens and you're dealing with it. So the question I kept asking, so when we get folks downrange, they get in there, they find the bad stuff, they get it, they shoot it, they get the satellite uplink, they're showing us pictures of it, we're sitting back in Washington going, man, that's really bad. What's changed? I mean, literally, how long do you think it takes us to get a team in there after a disaster? The human body cannot survive the hypersonic cruise missile attack vehicles DARPA's building, right? So I can't just like shoot them in there. Maybe if I shot a lot, we may get one or two, but generally they or the equipment won't survive. So how do I get them in there? I mean, the roads are down, the trees are down, power lines down. How do I get people in there? Yeah, if I can fly. Hurricanes are notorious for not ever doing what you're supposed to do. Sometimes, as soon as they hit, you got clear weather. Some days, they just linger and you get such bad weather you can't even fly in them. So whether I'm driving, flying, throwing them out the back of a C-130 and parachuting them in, I got to get them there. Or I can embed them, which is always fun. Anybody here want to volunteer to basically go into a vulnerable, flood-prone area in the face of a major hurricane so that you can send us information about how bad it is if you survive? Okay, so you got to get there. Now we got them there. And they're sending us stuff back. So I can generally count for about 12 to 24 hours to get somebody in there to get information and get it back up to us. So we can sit in Washington drinking coffee with flush toilets, air conditioning, and big screens and go, it's really bad. What's changed? Nada. But we put a lot of emphasis that the reason we were behind, we did not have an assessment of how bad it was. And until we had that, we didn't know what they were going to need. And if you go with that model, social media will only speed up the confusion cycle, because you got to wait till somebody says it's really bad before you start doing something. And that happened in Joplin. But it happened faster, so it wasn't too bad. But here's what happens. If you're waiting to react to the aftermath of an event until you actually have a formal assessment of what's happening, you're going to lose 12 to 24 or more hours. Now, how long are the injured going to be lingering and make it? If you're taking 12 to 24 hours to figure out it's bad, now you got to start moving stuff, right? So again, if one of the things I want to do is save lives, how long do the injured have? Those of you that have backgrounds in medicine say, well, you got the golden hour for the really bad trauma patients. We'll just assume if it's that bad, we're not going to change their outcome. But for those that have survivable injuries, how long will they make it without aid? And you start hitting a break point in about 24 hours that people generally are either going to make it on their own or you're not going to change their outcome. So for the greatest good, you got about a 24-hour window that if you're going to have some impact of changing the outcome for those that are severely injured but don't have life-threatening injuries that would not have made it anyway, you got about 24 hours. Now, how does it work if I'm spending that time getting in there I need to find out how bad it is? So I said, perhaps we shouldn't be waiting for that. Perhaps we should make the assumption if something bad's happened, it's bad, and respond against that. Well, we won't know it's that bad. I'm like, that's true. But I don't get time back. Speed and response is the most perishable commodity you have. So I look for anything and anybody that can get us to a decision that says, not only are we going, we have the right stuff and enough stuff getting to the right places. Because if I'm going to change the outcome, I literally have to get resources from outside of that local disaster in there. Now, who are they coming from? Trust me, it isn't what government's always doing. It could just as much be getting the private sector being able to get lifelines back up and get retail back up. But you've got to get from the outside in, because if you can run it from the inside, you don't need us. Remember, we're trying to change outcomes, so the assumption here is, because some people said, what's the difference between a disaster and an emergency? Basically, in an emergency, you got more responders and you got survivors. So you got to get resources from the outside in. And you got to know what you're going to need. You got to know who's going to get there, and will they have the critical mass to change that outcome? Preferably more stuff than you need. People like to right-side stuff and have precision. In disasters, it's like just being close enough is good. Sometimes I think people, because we love our technology. And it gives the illusion, I've always loved this one, they got PowerPoints, the big screens, and the satellite imagery. It gives you such a sense of precision that isn't even inherent to the disasters that people think they can be very precise in what they're doing. I'm like, no, disasters are like horseshoes, hand grenades, and thermonuclear devices. You just need to be close. Preferably more, not less. Running out of stuff's bad. And people say, well, isn't that wasteful? I'm like, we're not producing widgets. I'm not looking at a cost factor per unit. I'm looking at lives. Speed is my key indicator. And so when the tornado struck in the southeast, the first ones, the first wave that did, we actually got hit in the Carolinas. Then we got the second wave coming in a couple of weeks later that hit down in Alabama, Mississippi, and throughout much of the southeast. We got some reports earlier in the day that Alabama had some fatalities, but again, it was well within their capability to respond. But by the 5 or 6 o'clock time frame, reports were coming in quite more frequently of more tornadoes. Starting to get reports that there may be more fatalities, but the initial numbers were like still in the teens, well within the capability of Alabama to manage. And so you're kind of listening to this and you're kind of going, yeah, it still sounds like Alabama's got it, but we may be dealing with some damage assessments in the next couple of days to determine if they need a presidential disaster declaration. So we don't have yet Alabama, basically saying this is really bad. They're still responding to it, and it's escalating. And now I'm starting to get this sense that I'm not sure we know how bad it is. Well, my guy said, we don't have any requests yet. I said, that's not what I'm saying. I'm starting to get too many data points. They go, well, from where are you getting your information from? Well, I'm hashtagging Alabama tornadoes, guys. It's not that hard. And I'm starting to see tweets that are coming up that are like, this isn't what we're hearing from the state yet, which is not a reflection on the state, but think about it. If you're busy in a response, how much time are you going to spend reporting, especially if you're still discovering how bad it is? And then you've got the itinerant tornado chasers and the Weather Channel and everybody else. Now they're starting to put up video and pictures. And, if it was just one area, I wasn't too excited. The problem was I'm starting to see stuff from places that aren't geographically in the same spot. So I'm pretty sure this isn't the retweet phenomenon where one thing gets retweeted and now you think it's something big. These were actually different places. So I get the call. The governor's now requesting that the president declare an emergency declaration to make federal assistance available. And I was like, okay. And they're saying, but we don't have any assessments. Should we send it tonight or wait until the morning when we have more information? And I'm like going, send it. Well, we don't know how bad it is. I'm like, that's why we're sending it. Guys, it may not be that bad, but we don't know it's not that bad. Nobody can definitively say we know how bad it is. We don't know the total scope of this. We got areas that it turned out didn't even have 911 because the 911 center was gone. The little town of Smytheville in Mississippi was wiped off the map. And so what happened was, if we had waited and done what we thought was their thing to do after Katrina, which, well, we don't know how bad it is, so we need to get teams in there. We need to do assessments. We need to get some video. We need to show how bad it is before we do this. We'd have been the next day. As it was, President concurred, declared the emergency. We got that done. It was more formality than anything else, and we started moving people. And then I got the question, well, we don't know how many people to move. I'm like, look, it ain't that hard, guys. The Weather Service is telling us where the tornadoes are touching down on radar, right? Get out a map. Find out the county population, respond against that. Well, that's not very precise. I'm like, it doesn't need to be precise. If I know there's like 20,000 people live in the county, just had an F5 go through it, I can be pretty sure there's probably some need there. And if I send enough stuff for 20,000, I probably got enough stuff there, right? Well, the state hasn't requested it yet. I said, they're still responding to the life safety mission. Start moving it, because we're going to start bringing stuff from all over the country. And if it's not in a truck, not on an airplane, not moving, it won't get there. Remember, I don't get time back. Well, what if you don't need it? We call those exercises, we send them back. But we looked at social media as the public telling us enough information to suggest this was worse than we thought, to make decisions to spend, anybody here a U.S. taxpayer, spend your money to get moving without waiting for a formal request, without waiting for assessments, without waiting to know how bad, because we needed to change that outcome. Somebody says, well, how do you know what to monitor? Do you have like a system that, and then I get all these folks coming up with these great solutions. Oh, we can read all the tweets and boil it down into a couple bullet points so you'll have situational awareness. I'm like, okay, thanks, but it's actually hashtag easier. The other thing is, people say, well, how do you know all this information is out there? I said, it's like swimming in a river. The water you're swimming in won't be there when you get out. It just keeps moving. And I'm going, look, all I need is enough information to hit my tipping point. I don't need a lot of information. Guys, there's people that fill the screens up. You know, have you ever been to an emergency operations center? Have you ever seen the big screens? Do you know what the purpose of the big screens are? It's entertainment. Do you ever see the movie War Games? Everybody thinks their EOC is supposed to look like that. NORAD doesn't even look like that. But for whatever reason, we like putting the satellite up there of a hurricane because literally hurricanes are slow-moving events until they make landfall on your board, so every 6 hours you get an update, so you got to have something up there. And I always ask, how many people can interpret what that satellite means? Nobody. Why is it up there? Well, we need to see where it's at. It's moving like 20 miles an hour, guys. I think we could actually move my hand on the map faster than it's doing up there. But we look at all this stuff, and I go, did it change the outcome? Did you make a different decision? Did you send more stuff faster, write stuff, make decision, or realize this isn't that bad, we don't need to step on the gas? And that's how I look at social media, because here's the other thing. We tend to look in government as the public, you in particular, that if you're not in government service, is not worthy, not trustworthy. You have not been cleared. You do not have a background check. You're not red carded. You don't have the incident command system training. You are the unwashed masses. And you panic in a disaster and cannot be relied upon to think rationally. And so we often go, well, how are you making decisions on these broadcasts from these people? Because that's the public. We don't trust the public. It's not official. Nobody called 911. I used to run a 911 center, and I was a paramedic. You know how many times I got sent to an unknown illness that turned out to be a shooting in progress? So I think the official part is kind of overplayed. But I need this information to make a better decision. So the other thing we have to train ourselves is if you want to make social media real, you have to recognize the public is a resource, not a liability. Do they all speak coherently? We don't even speak coherently. Do they have one voice? No, neither do we. Are they always right? No, and we are rarely. But it's information. And it's how you look at that information, not just to be looking at the information because everybody's tweeting, so now you got to have hashtags, and it's Craig at FEMA, in case you're wondering, and all this other nonsense. It's just a tool, folks. I want to change the outcome. Quite honestly, if regen shortwave radios that squeal and pop when you tune them got me to that, I'd be using that technology. I don't care about the technology. What I care about is what people use to communicate, information they share, things they are doing that can help me make a better decision faster. Not necessarily more accurate, but faster to change outcomes. So at FEMA, I deal with the inertia and the bureaucracy of any organization and trying to impress upon people that this is how people communicate. Our way of communicating in the past, and if you read my tweets, I'm guilty of this, is like yelling at you with a megaphone. We talk at people. We don't listen very well. And this is probably, I think, the last thing I want to leave you with. Government is having an entirely too much fun trying to figure this out. We do some really dumb stuff. We basically, some of us have turned tweeters into basically our press releases. So it's faster, but it's still a press release. We look at social media as the way to get our message out. You ever heard that? We need social media to get our message out. We work for you. Why aren't we listening? And so this is the thing in disasters. How do you carry on two-way conversations that don't allow an individual one-for-one transaction, but says we need to be listening to what's going out there? Not necessarily that I can adjust or respond to each individual thing, but I have a better understanding what is going on so I can focus on changing these outcomes based upon what people are telling us to make sure that our assumptions match the reality as they see it. And I've heard this, well, that's not true. Yeah, but there's about 100 people that think it is. Your reality is not their reality. What are you going to do about it? So with that, I want to leave you with this. Social media wasn't around in Hurricane Andrew. Social media was barely scratching the surface in 2004. What's going to be there in 2016? Don't get wrapped around the fad. Look at how people communicate. This is how they communicate. It's mobile, it's portable, it's self-aware, it's geocoded. This knows where it's at. And if the system's down, it's coming back faster than people realize. How many people thought when we went into Haiti there would be no technology there working? Most of us stateside who've never been overseas, the assumption was, as bad as that earthquake is, there's no communications. Our response was get up our airborne transmitters and start handing out radios. The reality was they text like fiends down there. And the other question is, I love Haitian tech. How do you keep cell phones charged when there's no power? Well, guess what? There's no power in Haiti on a good day in a lot of places. You take a car battery, an inverter, and a power strip, and you charge a couple of pennies to charge a cell phone, and it's an enterprise. And everywhere we went, we saw kids making money, charging cell phones, and people tweeting, and here we are sitting there trying to go a broadcast methodology to a community that uses one-to-one communication through text messaging to share information. We have to learn how to communicate the way the people we are trying to help communicate. We have to learn how to listen to them, and we have to quit looking at the public and the people we're trying to help as liabilities and look at them as resources. Now, the role of social media is a fun debate, but the bottom line is I don't care what you're using. We work and support the needs of those survivors, not the other way around. Thank you. I would normally be able to do questions, but since I ran my mouth too long, I probably had too much coffee, I actually have to go. We do something at FEMA called Thunderbolts. They're no-notice exercises, and when I started them, I was inflicting them on my staff, but then I changed the ground rules that senior leadership can't be briefed. Guess what? They hit me with a thunderbolt. I must go to an exercise.
I think Administrator Fugate just knocked that out of the park in such a huge way. Thank you so much for your remarks. That was hugely interesting, and thank God somebody like that is in government. Really awesome. Guys, we're going to go to a break now. So if you guys could go enjoy coffee, check out the demo tables, come back here at 10:30. Thanks.